Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to close your eyes and just for a second. Imagine the late 1990s. The internet is making that awful screeching dial-up noise.
Oh, I remember it well.
Right. Reality TV is just sort of crawling out of the primordial soup, and pop culture is absolutely obsessed with the extreme. Everything has to be louder, faster, and more shocking than whatever happened last week.
It was definitely a time of excess. You had shock jocks just ruling the radio. Jackass culture was starting to bubble up. The boundaries of what was okay were being pushed every single day.
Exactly. And standing right in the middle of that whole chaotic storm is a woman who was described by Salon magazine in 1999 with, I think, one of the most vivid and frankly wildest sentences I've ever read in a profile piece.
I have the quote right here.
And
It is. It's quite the visual.
It really is. They called her, and I'm quoting here, a surgically enhanced cartoon bombshell who looks like the love child of Jessica Rabbit and Bart Simpson.
That is a very specific, very 90s image.
It is. So today, we are deep diving into the life of Houston.
Mm.
And for those listening who might not know the name, Houston-born Kimberly Halsey was a Hall of Fame figure in the adult entertainment industry.
Right.
But looking at our stack of sources today, which includes this really deep, intimate profile from The Observer and a narrative piece from Arena magazine, calling her just an adult performer feels like a huge understatement. She feels more like a cultural artifact of that specific moment in time.
That is the perfect way to frame it. She was a symbol. And the mission for this deep dive is really to peel back the layers of that cartoon image. Because it is so easy to look at the headlines she generated, and trust me, she generated some massive controversial ones, and just see the caricature. You see the surgery, the records, the stunts. But when you actually read these articles, you find a completely different person underneath.
Do you find Kim?
You find Kim, a woman who is balancing this incredibly intense, extreme global fame with a surprising, almost desperate desire for, well, domestic normalcy. We're talking about a woman who broke industry endurance records, but also really just wanted to go to a high school prom and run errands with a boyfriend.
And that prom story,
Yeah?
oh, we are definitely getting to that because it is the heart of this whole thing. But let's start at the beginning. Who was she before the world knew her as Houston? Because the sources mention a background that I honestly just did not expect.
It's a fascinating trajectory. She actually got into the industry relatively late by the standards of the time. She was 27 when she started in 1995.
That is late for that field.
Very. But before that, she had this nomadic, eclectic life. She grew up partly in Norway, of all places.
Oh, wait.
Norway. And before the adult industry, she was working as an oil wrestling performer in Hollywood.
Wait, oil wrestling? That feels like the most 1990s job title I can possibly imagine. Like, was that a legitimate career path?
In the Hollywood club scene of the early 90s, absolutely. It was part of that whole spectacle nightlife. But even then, she wasn't just another performer. She was cultivating a very specific look.
Right.
She stood 5'7", but her brand was built on what the sources call a surgically enhanced aesthetic. She wasn't trying to look natural. She was trying to look like a fantasy. Or maybe, more accurately, an exaggeration of a fantasy.
It reminds me of how comic book art changed in the 90s, where everything became hyper-exaggerated. She was doing that with her own physical form.
Exactly. And that aesthetic is what eventually led to her biggest claim to fame. Or maybe notoriety is the better word. In 1999, she participated in a production called The Houston 620. Now, we need to keep this friendly for everyone listening, so without getting too graphic, this was essentially an endurance record.
Right. The title kind of gives away the number.
It does. But to really understand why this happened, you have to look at the business context of 1999. This is something the sources highlight that I think it's overlooked. The adult industry was facing a new existential threat, the internet.
Ah, right. Napster was coming for music. And I assume similar things were happening for video.
Exactly. Suddenly, free clips were everywhere. So the studios couldn't just sell romance or standard scripted scenes anymore because you could get that for free. They had to sell spectacle. They had to sell events. It became like extreme sports.
They needed something that would make people stop and stare.
Precisely. So she wasn't just doing this for the sake of it. She was adapting to a changing market. It was a business move.
It was performance art meets endurance.
That's it. Houston's performance involved a marathon session with over 600 partners in a single day. It was a stunt designed to grab headlines in a noisy world, and it worked. It cemented her place in the history books of that genre. She was even inducted into the Avian Hall of Fame in 2004 and the XRCO Hall of Fame later on.
It's interesting because when you frame it that way, as a reaction to the internet economy, it makes her sound incredibly business savvy. She knew she had to be the most extreme to survive in a dying model.
She did. She understood the assignment. But here's the thing about reaching that level of extreme notoriety. You eventually want to cross over. You want to be mainstream.
You don't want to just be famous in one niche.
No, you want to be famous everywhere. And around 2000, we see Houston trying to make that jump.
And she had some momentum, didn't she? I saw mentions of music videos in the notes.
She did. She appeared in videos for bands that were huge at the time, like Sum 41 and the Hellsong and the Cottonmouth Kings. She was even in a VH1 documentary called Porn to Rock.
Oh, right, which chronicled adult stars trying to launch music careers.
Exactly. She released a single called What Do You Want From Me? Which I haven't heard it, but the title feels very poignant given her life story.
It really does. It's asking the audience directly about their consumption of her.
But there is one specific story from the Observer article that I think perfectly encapsulates this era of her life. It is the sculpture story. Did you catch this part?
Oh, absolutely. This was my stop the car moment in the reading.
Yeah.
It is just so surreal.
Mm-hmm.
So Houston decides she wants to change the aesthetics of her intimate anatomy. She goes in for surgery to have a trim, so to speak.
A common procedure, actually. Nothing too wild there. It's purely aesthetic.
Sure, but what she did after is what makes it a Houston story. She didn't just let the doctor discard the tissue.
No. She had the removed parts encased in lucite on a marble stand as a sculpture.
Just pause on that image for a second. A piece of her own body in lucite as art.
And not just as like a keepsake on a mantle, she planned to auction it. The sources mentioned she estimated it could fetch between $50,000 or $100,000 on a specialized auction site.
That is, well, on one hand, it's certainly entrepreneurial. If people are obsessed with your body, sell them every piece of it. But on the other hand, that's incredibly dark.
It is. But the scene described in The Observer is what really sticks with me. She's backstage at this club, legs diamond, getting ready for a show. She's drinking a wine cooler, smoking a Marlboro Ultralight again, peak late 90s vibes.
Total 90s vibes.
And she has this photographer, Mark Medoff, taking glamour shots of her with the lucite sculpture.
Wait, she's posing with a piece of herself.
Yes. The photographer is directing her, telling her to hold this piece of her own body up to her cheek, asking her to pose with it like it's a perfume bottle. It highlights the absolute commodification of her existence. There was literally no part of her that wasn't for sale or for show.
It makes you wonder if she was in on the joke or if she was trapped by it. Like, was she aware of her status as a product?
I think she was painfully aware. She understood that her value in that marketplace was shock and novelty. She was leaning into the absurdity. But this is where the duality comes in, because at the exact same time she is auctioning off body parts and breaking endurance records, she is frantically searching for something completely different.
And this leads us to the prom date.
The prom date.
This is the core narrative of our deep dive today. If you only remember one thing about Houston, it should probably be this, because it humanizes her in a way nothing else does. So set the scene for us. How does an adult film superstar end up at a high school prom?
It's 1999. You have Brad Parascandolo. He's a high school senior from Staten Island, self-described class clown. He wants to make his senior prom legendary, but he doesn't have a date. So his mother suggests he call a famous radio show.
Please tell me it was the Howard Stern Show.
It was absolutely the Howard Stern Show.
Right.
Brad calls in, looking for a date, and Houston, who is arguably the biggest star in the adult world at that moment, agrees to go.
I can only imagine the chaos that caused at a Staten Island high school. The principal must have lost his mind.
Oh, it was a circus. The sources describe camera crews, a glass elevator entrance, parents terrified that she was going to be a distraction. It was the ultimate publicity stunt.
Everyone expected a train wreck.
Right. They expected the cartoon bombshell to arrive and turn the prom into a scandal. You expect wild behavior. You expect her to jump on a table. But that's not what happened.
Not at all.
No. And this is where Brad's character comes in. According to the Arena magazine piece, Brad was determined to prove he wasn't a slut or just some kid looking for a thrill. He wanted to treat her like a lady. They danced, they talked in the limo, and contrary to every teenage boy's fantasy or expectation, nothing happened that night.
No romantic encounter.
None. They went home separately. Brad went back to his mom's house, and Houston went to her hotel.
But the story didn't end there. And this is the part that just blew my mind when I was going through the notes. They actually started dating, like for real.
They did. The publicity stunt turned into a genuine long-term relationship. Brad actually moved out to California to live with her.
And what did that life look like? Because in my head, I'm picturing parties and mansions and the Playboy lifestyle.
The total opposite. It was errands. It was Christmas presents. It was trips to the Bahamas. The sources say Brad's mother and grandmother absolutely loved her. There is this quote where Brad says his mom was smiling in photos like it was my wedding day.
That is so wholesome that actually hurts a little bit.
Yeah,
It's such a sharp left turn from the 620 record and the lucite sculpture.
it really is.
So why did this work? You have this international superstar of the adult industry and a teenager from Staten Island. What was the glue there?
I think for Houston, Brad represented safety. He was a slice of normalcy in a life that was increasingly defined by extremes. He wasn't in the industry. He wasn't trying to exploit her. He was just a guy who thought she was nice.
And for Brad.
For Brad, it was like a graduate school of life experience. He got to see a world nobody else his age saw, but he also provided her with this grounding domesticity she clearly craved.
It's fascinating because it shows how lonely that level of fame must have been for her. That her refuge was running errands with a high schooler. It suggests that Houston, the character, was just exhausting to maintain.
Exactly. And the sources really emphasized this split. She explicitly told interviewers, "I'm so Kim and I'm so Houston." She saw them as two different people.
Let's talk about that duality, because the sources paint a really complex picture of her internal life. We mentioned the wine cooler and the cigarette backstage at Legs Diamond earlier, but the notes mention the conversation she was having was surprising.
It was about politics. She was discussing Al Gore. She was supporting him for president because she felt he was better for the adult industry than the alternative. It just shows she wasn't this vapid cartoon character. She was engaged with the world and thinking about the political ramifications on her livelihood.
She was a voter. She was a citizen.
Right. And then there was the faith aspect. This was really surprising to me and frankly quite sad.
Yeah, let's get into that.
It's a massive contradiction, but a very human one. She came from a religious background. She told the Observer that she had a big faith in the Lord and that her father prayed for her every day.
And didn't she get a tattoo related to this?
She did. This detail really struck me. Right before filming that record-breaking 620 movie, the one with over 600 partners, she got a tattoo of an angel on the back of her neck.
What was the reasoning behind that?
She described it as a way of asking for forgiveness or showing her love to God, almost as an apology for what she was about to do.
That is heartbreaking. She's walking into this performance that will define her career, arguably devalue her in the eyes of mainstream society, and she's physically marking herself with a plea for forgiveness beforehand.
It speaks to the psychological toll. She had to compartmentalize Kim from Houston just to survive. Kim was the girl who fed animals and prayed. Houston was the product that broke records.
And unfortunately, as we see so often, the industry is not kind to products that age.
No, it is not.
Let's fast forward to 2012. Houston had retired. She'd been away for about 10 years, but she tried to make a comeback. And the reception, well, looking at the forums and the feedback from that time, it was brutal.
It was. In the interim, she had undergone extensive cosmetic surgeries, facelifts, lip work, a Brazilian butt lift. She was chasing the fountain of youth. But when she returned to the screen, the audience, the fans who had idolized her in the 90s, turned on her.
What were they saying?
They criticized her for looking orange or plastic. They said she looked older than she was. It's a cruel irony. The industry demands this hyper-enhanced perfection, this cartoon look she was famous for. But when she pursued that look to its extreme as she aged, she was punished for it.
It really highlights the tragedy of that career path. You turn your body into a business, but unlike a regular business where you can pivot or rebrand, that business is your face, it's your skin.
And you can't escape it. When the market decides your look is over, it's not just a product failure. It feels like a failure of the self.
So she retired for good after that.
Yes, the backlash seemed to close the door on that chapter. She retreated back into privacy.
It's a heavy story. You start with the flashy headlines, the prom date, the records, but you end with a woman just trying to find where Kim fits into the world.
I think that's the key takeaway here. Houston was a pioneer of the extreme era. She pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable and physically possible in that medium. But at the end of the day, the sources show us someone who was constantly looking for an exit ramp, or at least a safe harbor.
Whether that was a lucite sculpture to sell off a piece of the product, or a high school boyfriend to make her feel like a normal person.
Precisely. She was trying to reclaim ownership of herself in all these different ways.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, why does Houston's story matter today? Beyond just 90s nostalgia.
I think her story illustrates the complex human cost of becoming a caricature. We love to consume these larger-than-life figures, especially when they are controversial. We label them, we laugh at the Jessica Rabbit meets Bart Simpson quotes. But there is a real person navigating that. She was a blonde bombshell with fearless energy, as the fans called her, but she eventually found that the industry she helped define had moved past her, leaving her with the consequences.
It's a reminder that the people in these industries, or even reality TV stars today, are not just pixels on a screen.
And that leads to a final thought that really stuck with me from the reading. It's a contrast that I can't get out of my head. The sources mention that during her time touring in Poland, there were protesters outside.
Protesters?
Yes, they were calling her the Antichrist.
The Antichrist. That is heavy.
It is. But do you know what she was doing in her free time on that same trip? While being called the Antichrist.
Jealous.
She was putting flowers on the tomb of the unknown soldier and donating food to animal shelters.
Wow.
It forces us to ask a difficult question. How much of a performer's identity is just a mask we force them to wear? We see the Antichrist. The reality is a woman quietly feeding dogs and praying for forgiveness.
That is a powerful image to leave on, the mask versus the person. Thank you for walking us through this one. It was definitely more than I expected.
My pleasure. It's always more complex than the headlines.
And thank you for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you on the next one.